Why does the book of Revelation begin the end of the world not with demons, but with four riders on horseback? An exiled visionary watched as the seals of heaven were broken, and a white horse emerged first, not death, but conquest disguised as victory. Then came war, famine, and a pale horse the color of a decaying corpse. For 2,000 years, scholars have argued over their meaning. Were they a prophecy of the future, or a hidden pattern buried within every collapsing civilization? The most disturbing answer may be that the four horsemen are not coming someday. They may have been riding beside humanity all along. What if the most terrifying prophecy in the Bible is not a prediction of the future, but a memory of something humanity keeps repeating? Imagine standing before an ancient door sealed for nearly 2,000 years. The wood is blackened by time. The iron hinges are frozen with salt from forgotten seas. On the other side waits a vision so disturbing that generations of theologians, kings, and scholars have struggled to agree on what it truly means. Not dragons, not demons, not armies descending from the sky. For riders, for horses, for symbols that emerge from the pages of Revelation like shadows riding out of eternity itself. An old man sits alone on a rocky island. The wind howls across the dark waters. A lamp flickers beside a scroll. Then comes the vision. A seal is broken in heaven. A horse appears. Then another. Then another. Then another. Each one carries a different color, a different purpose, a different warning. Yet the greatest mystery is not who these riders are. It is why they come in this precise order: conquest, war, famine, death, as if they are not separate disasters at all, but pieces of a single design. For centuries, people have searched these images for clues about the end of the world. They have looked for hidden dates, secret kingdoms, and signs of approaching judgment. But what if they were searching in the wrong direction? What if the four horsemen were never meant to reveal when history ends? What if they were meant to reveal how civilizations collapse? Tonight, we begin where the mystery begins, not with answers, but with a question that still echoes across the centuries. Why would a divine revelation choose four riders to explain the fate of humanity? To understand the four horsemen, we must leave behind the world we know and step into the eastern frontier of the Roman Empire at the end of the 1st century. The Mediterranean is ruled by Rome. Marble temples rise above crowded cities. Legionary standards cast long shadows across stone roads stretching from Britain to Judea. Yet beneath the appearance of order, the empire trembles with uncertainty. Rebellions flare in distant provinces. Rumors of war travel with merchants and sailors. Famine is never far away. Disease can transform a thriving city into a place of mourning within a single season. For many ordinary people, history feels fragile. In this world, a small and often persecuted religious movement struggles to survive. The followers of Christ gather quietly in homes and hidden meeting places. They inherit the sacred traditions of ancient Israel, a culture deeply shaped by prophets, visions, and symbolic language. To them, history is not a random sequence of events. It is a stage upon which divine purposes unfold. Far from the great centers of power lies a rocky island called Patmos. Winds from the Aegean Sea crash against its barren cliffs. Here, according to tradition, an elderly exile receives a series of extraordinary visions. He writes not as a historian recording events, but as a witness attempting to describe realities beyond ordinary human language. The world of Revelation is filled with heavenly thrones, living creatures, sealed scrolls, and cosmic signs. Its imagery draws from centuries of Jewish prophetic literature, echoing the voices of Ezekiel, Daniel, Zechariah, and Isaiah. Every symbol carries layers of meaning. Every image points beyond itself. The four horsemen emerge from this sacred landscape. They are not isolated figures wandering through a myth. They ride out of a world where empires rise and fall, where prophecy and history intertwine, and where every vision is believed to conceal a deeper truth waiting to be uncovered. The vision begins not on earth, but before a throne beyond human geography. A sealed scroll rests at the center of the heavenly court, held within a realm illuminated by a light unlike sunlight or fire. Around it stand living creatures whose forms seem drawn from the deepest layers of sacred imagination. Their voices echo like distant thunder through a celestial architecture of crystal, gold, and blazing radiance. Then the first seal is broken. The sound is not described as an explosion or a cry, but as a command. Come. Out of the unfolding vision emerges a white horse. Its brightness cuts through the darkness like polished ivory beneath a storm-filled sky. Upon it rides a figure carrying a bow, crowned yet strangely silent. Before questions can form, another seal opens. A second horse appears, red as fresh spilled blood reflecting torchlight upon bronze walls. Its rider carries a great sword, and the air itself seems to tighten with the promise of violence. Then comes the third. A black horse steps forward from the shadows. Its color absorbs the surrounding light, and in the hand of its rider hangs a balanced scale, swaying gently as though measuring something invisible. Not lives, not souls, something more fragile. Finally, the fourth seal is broken. What emerges is neither white nor black nor red. Its color defies easy description. Pale, sickly, the hue of fading flesh beneath cold moonlight. The rider bears a name unlike the others. Death. Behind him follows a silent realm of shadows. Together the four horses stand like living symbols painted across the canvas of eternity. White, red, black, pale. Their colors form a sequence. Their arrival follows an order. Their presence transforms the heavenly vision into something deeply unsettling. For they do not appear as chaotic monsters. They arrive with purpose, as though they are part of a design older than kingdoms, older than empires, perhaps as old as human history itself. The four horsemen did not emerge from a peaceful world. They appeared during an age shaped by conflict, uncertainty, and competing visions of history itself. To the people living under Roman rule, power seemed eternal. Legions guarded the roads. Emperors claimed divine favor. Temples and monuments proclaimed the triumph of the empire. Yet beneath this image of stability lay deep fractures. In Judea, memories of war and destruction remained painfully fresh. The Second Temple had fallen. Entire communities carried the scars of rebellion, exile, and loss. Against this backdrop, the early followers of Christ struggled to understand their place in history. Some believed divine judgment upon earthly powers was approaching. Others expected a restoration of justice through heavenly intervention. The language of prophecy became a battlefield of interpretation. Was Revelation describing events already unfolding around them, or realities still hidden beyond the horizon of time? The four horsemen stood at the center of this tension. Their imagery echoed older prophetic traditions, yet their meaning remained elusive. Even among ancient readers, there was no single consensus. Some may have seen the riders as symbols of Rome's expanding power and the suffering that followed conquest. Others may have understood them as cosmic forces operating behind the visible world. Theological questions soon followed historical ones. If these riders represented judgment, who was being judged? The empire? Humanity? The faithful themselves? An even deeper paradox emerged. The riders are not portrayed as rebellious enemies storming heaven. They appear only after the seals are opened. Their arrival seems connected to divine authority rather than opposition to it. This created a dilemma that would echo through centuries of religious thought. Are the four horsemen agents of punishment, warnings of consequence, or symbolic reflections of humanity's own actions? The ancient text offers images, but few explanations. And within that silence, generations of interpreters have continued to find different answers. The deeper we travel into the text of Revelation, the more the familiar image of the four horsemen begins to change. Much of what modern readers imagine comes from centuries of paintings, sermons, and retellings rather than the precise language of the ancient manuscript itself. One of the most intriguing examples appears in the description of the fourth horse. Many translations call it a pale horse, yet the original Greek word is chloros. In the ancient world, this word could describe the color of young grass, diseased skin, or the greenish hue of a body touched by death. The image is stranger and more unsettling than the simple word pale suggests. Hidden details also surround the first rider. The text never explicitly identifies him. Unlike the fourth rider, who is named Death, the rider on the white horse remains anonymous. This silence has fueled centuries of speculation. Some early interpreters saw a victorious and righteous figure. Others suspected a deceptive conqueror wearing the appearance of purity. The text itself refuses to settle the debate. Beyond the canonical book of Revelation, echoes of similar imagery appear within older prophetic traditions. The book of Zechariah describes colored horses moving throughout the earth as agents connected to divine observation and judgment. While not identical to the Four Horsemen, these earlier visions suggest that horse symbolism already carried deep religious significance long before Revelation was written. Certain later traditions and apocalyptic writings expanded these themes even further, imagining cosmic battles, heavenly messengers, and hidden forces shaping human history. Yet many of these texts survived only in fragments or remained outside the official biblical canon. What survives is a collection of clues rather than a complete explanation. The closer we examine the ancient words, the more we discover that Revelation often reveals meaning through mystery. Its symbols are carefully painted, but their final interpretation is left deliberately unfinished, as though the text itself expects each generation to wrestle with the vision anew. To the ancient mind, symbols were not decorative elements added to a story. They were a language. A horse was never just a horse. A color was never merely a color. Every detail carried layers of meaning that connected history, theology, and human experience into a single image. The Four Horsemen must be understood within this symbolic world. The white horse appears first. In ancient literature, white often represented victory, legitimacy, and authority. Yet the rider carries a bow rather than a sword, and his identity remains hidden. This ambiguity has led many scholars to view him as the symbol of conquest itself, the irresistible expansion of power that often arrives clothed in the language of order, destiny, or righteousness. The red horse follows. Its color immediately evokes blood, warfare, and violence. But the text describes something more specific. The rider is granted the power to remove peace from the earth. In symbolic terms, this is not merely war. It is the collapse of social harmony, the moment when communities turn against one another and conflict becomes unavoidable. The black horse introduces a different kind of crisis. The scales carried by its rider resemble the measuring instruments used in ancient marketplaces. Archaeological evidence from the Roman world reveals how closely food, grain, and economic stability were linked. The image suggests scarcity, inflation, and the painful calculation of survival. Then comes the fourth horse, colored with the unsettling hue of decay. Unlike the others, its rider is explicitly named. Death is not portrayed as an independent force, but as the final consequence of everything that came before. Through the lens of biblical symbolism, the sequence is striking. Conquest gives birth to conflict. Conflict disrupts prosperity. Scarcity weakens societies. Death follows in their wake. The Four Horsemen therefore function not simply as supernatural figures, but as a symbolic chain of events. They transform historical realities into sacred imagery, allowing ancient readers to contemplate how the rise and fall of civilizations might reveal deeper patterns woven into the human condition itself. Most interpretations of the Four Horsemen focus on what they represent individually: conquest, war, famine, death. Yet some of the most intriguing and controversial readings in history suggest that this approach may miss the deeper structure of the vision entirely. According to a less common interpretation found among certain theologians, historians, and symbolic readers, the Four Horsemen are not four separate disasters. They are four stages of a single process. In this reading, the vision does not describe isolated acts of divine judgment descending from heaven. It describes a chain reaction that unfolds within human societies themselves. The white horse becomes the beginning of expansion, ambition, and conquest. The red horse follows as conflict emerges from that expansion. The black horse appears when war disrupts production, trade, and stability. Finally, the pale horse arrives as disease, starvation, and death spread through populations weakened by the previous stages. This interpretation is sometimes considered controversial because it shifts attention away from predicting future events and toward examining recurring patterns in history. Another debated theory concerns the identity of the first rider. Throughout the centuries, some commentators viewed him as a righteous conqueror, perhaps even a positive symbol. Others argued that the white horse intentionally imitates sacred imagery in order to represent deception masquerading as virtue. In this view, the greatest dangers do not always arrive wearing the face of evil. They arrive wearing the face of legitimacy. A further interpretation, often discussed in symbolic and literary studies, proposes that the four horsemen function as archetypes rather than historical predictions. They embody forces embedded within the human condition itself: power, violence, scarcity, mortality. None of these readings can be proven with certainty, and none has achieved universal acceptance. Yet their persistence reveals something important. Across generations, scholars have repeatedly sensed that the vision may be describing more than a future catastrophe. It may be exposing mechanisms hidden within history itself, mechanisms that ancient readers recognized, but that remain difficult to confront even today. As the centuries passed, the Four Horsemen became one of the most debated images in biblical literature. The same vision that seemed clear to one generation appeared entirely different to the next. One of the oldest and most influential interpretations is often called the futurist view. According to this perspective, the writers describe events that will unfold near the end of history. The Four Horsemen are seen as literal signs of an approaching apocalypse, a sequence of global catastrophes that precede divine judgment and the transformation of the world. For those who hold this view, Revelation is primarily a prophecy of the future. Yet another tradition approaches the text from a very different direction. Known broadly as the historicist perspective, it argues that the writers have already been writing through history for centuries. In this interpretation, the vision is not tied to a single future event. Instead, it describes recurring forces that repeatedly shape human civilizations. Empires expand, wars erupt, economies collapse, populations suffer. The cycle appears again and again under different names and in different eras. A third approach, often favored by literary and symbolic scholars, shifts the discussion away from historical predictions altogether. Here, the Four Horsemen are understood as archetypal symbols. They represent enduring realities of human existence rather than specific events on a timeline. The vision becomes less about forecasting history and more about revealing truths hidden within it. Even the identity of the first writer remains contested. Is he a righteous conqueror, a deceptive imitator of sacred authority, or simply the embodiment of conquest itself? Each interpretation draws support from different aspects of the text, and none has fully silenced the others. The result is a remarkable situation in which a vision nearly 2,000 years old continues to generate new debates. Perhaps the most revealing question is not which theory is correct, but why the text was written in a way that allows so many possibilities to survive side by side. Unlike many figures from ancient mythology, the Four Horsemen leave behind no statues erected in their honor, no temples dedicated to their worship, and no inscription that explicitly identifies them. Their presence survives primarily through texts, images, and cultural memory. Yet the world that produced the vision has left many echoes in stone, parchment, and paint. On the island of Patmos, where tradition places the reception of revelation, visitors can still stand among rugged cliffs overlooking the Aegean Sea and imagine the isolation that shaped apocalyptic thought. Across the eastern Mediterranean, archaeological discoveries reveal a society deeply familiar with war, famine, disease, and imperial power, the very realities reflected in the sequence of the writers. Ancient coins portray emperors as victorious conquerors crowned by divine favor. Reliefs carved into triumphal monuments celebrate military expansion and the submission of conquered peoples. In these images, conquest appears noble and glorious, a striking parallel to the ambiguity surrounding the first rider on the white horse. Elsewhere, excavations of Roman granaries, marketplaces, and storage facilities remind us how vulnerable ancient economies were to disruption. A failed harvest, a military campaign, or a broken trade route could quickly transform abundance into scarcity. The scales carried by the black horse would have been instantly recognizable to people living in such a world. The most direct archaeological connection to Revelation comes through manuscripts. Fragments of the Greek text preserved in ancient codices allow scholars to examine the language used by early scribes. These manuscripts do not solve the mysteries of the Four Horsemen, but they preserve the words that generated centuries of interpretation. Beyond archaeology, cultural memory expanded the image. Medieval frescoes, illuminated manuscripts, and church murals transformed the writers into visual icons of apocalypse. These works are not evidence for the original meaning of the text. They are evidence of its lasting influence. Together, manuscripts, monuments, and artistic traditions form a trail of echoes. They do not prove how the vision should be understood, but they reveal how deeply its symbols became embedded within the imagination of civilizations across centuries. To an ancient reader, the Four Horsemen were not merely symbols of disaster. They were part of a much larger theological vision concerning the relationship between heaven, history, and human existence. The world of Revelation assumes that visible events and invisible realities are connected. Wars, famines, and political upheavals are not viewed as isolated accidents. They are understood within a sacred framework where earthly history unfolds beneath a greater cosmic order. This helps explain one of the most difficult aspects of the vision. The riders do not appear as enemies invading the heavenly realm. They emerge only after the seals are opened. For ancient audiences, this detail carried profound significance. It suggested that even the most frightening forces operating within history remain subject to a reality beyond human power. Yet this idea created a tension that theologians have wrestled with for centuries. If suffering exists within a divinely ordered universe, what purpose does it serve? The text itself offers no simple answer. Instead, it reflects a worldview common in many strands of ancient Jewish and early Christian thought. History is meaningful, even when it appears chaotic. Judgment, consequence, human choice, and divine sovereignty exist together in a relationship that cannot be fully reduced to a single formula. The Four Horsemen therefore function as more than punishments. They reveal the fragility of earthly power. Empires rise believing themselves permanent. Wealth creates an illusion of security. Military strength promises stability. Yet the vision reminds its audience that every human system remains vulnerable. From a theological perspective, the writers expose the limits of human control. They challenge the assumption that political authority, economic prosperity, or military success can ultimately protect a civilization from decline. Ancient readers may also have recognized another layer of meaning. The sequence of the writers reflects a moral and spiritual order embedded within history itself. Actions produce consequences. Power generates responsibilities. Choices shape destinies. In this sense, the vision is less concerned with predicting specific events than with revealing how the ancient religious imagination understood the hidden structure of reality and humanity's place within it. Beyond theology, beyond prophecy, and even beyond history, the Four Horsemen touch a question that has accompanied humanity since the earliest civilizations began carving symbols into stone and clay. Why do all things pass away? Ancient people lived much closer to uncertainty than we often imagine. Kingdoms rose and disappeared within living memory. Harvests failed. Cities burned. Epidemics swept through populations without warning. In such a world, the desire to understand existence was not merely an intellectual pursuit. It was a matter of survival. The Four Horsemen can be read as a reflection of that ancient struggle to find meaning within impermanence. Their sequence begins with power and ends with death. Between those 2 points lies the entire human condition. Ambition seeks expansion. Conflict follows ambition. Scarcity follows conflict. Mortality waits at the end of every road. Whether understood as divine symbols or literary archetypes, the writers reveal an uncomfortable truth recognized by philosophers, poets, and sages across the ancient world. Human beings possess the ability to build magnificent civilizations, yet remain unable to escape their own limitations. There is also a deeper tension hidden within the vision. Humanity longs to know the structure of reality. We search for patterns in the stars, in sacred texts, in the rise and fall of kingdoms. We seek explanations for suffering, order within chaos, and permanence within a changing world. Yet the closer we approach these mysteries, the more elusive they become. Revelation offers images rather than certainty, symbols rather than formulas, questions rather than complete answers. Perhaps this is why the Four Horsemen continue to fascinate. They stand at the boundary between what can be known and what remains concealed. They remind us that knowledge itself has limits. Even the visionary who witnessed the heavenly court could only describe what he saw through symbols and metaphors. In the end, The riders may represent not only the fragility of civilizations, but also the humility required when confronting mysteries larger than human understanding, mysteries that ancient minds believed were woven into the very fabric of existence. After following the riders through scripture, history, symbolism, theology, and philosophy, a different image begins to emerge from the shadows. The Four Horsemen may not be a puzzle designed to reveal a single secret. They may be a symbolic framework capable of holding many truths at once. Ancient readers saw prophecy. Historians see echoes of recurring crises. Theologians perceive reflections on judgment, consequence, and divine order. Literary scholars recognize a masterpiece of symbolic storytelling. Each perspective illuminates part of the vision, yet none completely exhausts its meaning. Perhaps this is precisely why the image has endured. The power of the Four Horsemen lies not in their certainty, but in their ambiguity. They operate simultaneously as sacred symbols and historical mirrors. They belong both to the world of apocalyptic imagination and to the realities that shaped ancient civilizations. The sequence itself may be the most revealing clue. The riders do not arrive in chaos. They arrive in order. Conquest, war, scarcity, death. Whether interpreted as prophecy, theology, or cultural memory, the progression suggests a pattern rather than a random collection of disasters. It portrays decline not as a single event, but as a process, a chain of causes and consequences unfolding across time. Yet the vision never fully explains why these forces exist, nor does it provide a simple formula for escaping them. Instead, it invites contemplation. It asks the reader to look beyond individual catastrophes and consider the deeper structures that shape history and human existence. The most profound revelation may therefore be neither the identity of the riders nor the timing of their arrival. It may be the realization that Revelation is less concerned with predicting a future apocalypse than with uncovering hidden dimensions of reality already present within the ancient understanding of the world. The Four Horsemen stand at the intersection of heaven and history, symbol and experience, fear and meaning. And it is within that intersection, rather than in any single interpretation, that the enduring mystery of the vision continues to reside. The vision now begins to fade. The horses disappear into the distance. The thunder of hooves grows silent. The heavenly scroll remains partially opened, its symbols still suspended between revelation and mystery. Yet perhaps the most important question was never hidden within the riders themselves. It lingers in what the vision refuses to explain. Ancient readers stood beneath the same uncertainty. They watched kingdoms rise with promises of permanence, only to see them pass into memory. They inherited stories of conquerors who believed their victories would last forever. They witnessed cities transformed into ruins and names swallowed by time. In such a world, the Four Horsemen were not merely images of fear. They were reminders of a deeper mystery. Why does every civilization eventually encounter the forces symbolized by the riders? Why do patterns of conquest, conflict, scarcity, and mortality seem woven into the fabric of history? The text offers symbols, but not final answers. Even the visionary on Patmos was given images rather than explanations. He saw colors, riders, seals, and shadows moving across a cosmic stage, yet the ultimate meaning remained partially concealed. Perhaps that concealment is intentional. In many ancient traditions, wisdom was not understood as the possession of complete knowledge. Wisdom began with recognizing the limits of what could be known. The Four Horsemen may therefore represent more than historical events, theological principles, or prophetic warnings. They may represent the boundary between human understanding and the larger realities that ancient people believed governed existence itself. And so the vision leaves us where it began, standing before a door that is open just enough to reveal a glimpse of what lies beyond, but never enough to remove every uncertainty. If the riders are not merely figures of apocalypse, but symbols of patterns hidden within history, within civilization, and perhaps within human nature itself, then one question remains waiting in the silence after the final seal is broken. Are we observing the riders, or were the ancient visionaries trying to show us something about ourselves that we have never fully understood?